After being ruthlessly fired by her corrupt and arrogant boss, Mr. Townsend, a financial analyst discovers a web of secrets hidden within his empire. Driven by betrayal and desperation to save her ailing mother, she uncovers evidence of tax evasion, embezzlement, and illegal dealings tied to a rising political star, Senator Richard Callaway. What starts as a quest for revenge spirals into a high-stakes battle of power, corruption, and justice. As she works with a fearless journalist and a disgruntled former insider to expose the truth, she risks everything, including her freedom and safety, to take down the man who destroyed her life. But when powerful enemies strike back, she realizes her actions have set her on a dangerous path with no way out. It started with a coffee stain. Not the dramatic kind that spills over an expensive white shirt in slow motion, but the quiet, almost unnoticed kind, a splatter across the corner of a desk report. It was a small thing, a trivial detail, but when my boss, Mr. Townsend, saw it, his reaction was anything but minor. "This is unacceptable," he barked, slamming the paper onto his oversized desk. His face, perpetually tanned and smug, twisted with irritation. "Do you understand how this makes us look to clients? Sloppy. Amateurish." I wanted to point out that the report wouldn't even leave the office, that the coffee stain had no bearing on the analysis I'd spent 2 sleepless nights perfecting. But I didn't. Not because I agreed with him, but because I'd learned long ago that contradicting Townsend was futile. "Yes, sir," I muttered, scooping up the paper. I was 34, single, drowning in student debt, and working 60-hour weeks in a job that had once felt like a golden ticket. As a financial analyst, I'd dreamed of wealth, prestige, and professional respect. Instead, I spent my days crunching numbers for a man who wouldn't hesitate to throw anyone under the bus for a quarterly gain. Still, I clung to the job because it was stable. Because the idea of starting over scared me more than the thought of enduring Townsend's endless condescension. That was until my mother's diagnosis. The call came during lunch. My mom, always so cheerful and optimistic, sounded like she was holding back tears. "They found something," she said. "A tumor." I left work early that day, ignoring the glares from Townsend and the whispers of my coworkers. By the time I got to the hospital, the doctor had confirmed it, late-stage ovarian cancer. The prognosis wasn't good, but there was hope if she started treatment immediately. The hope came with a price tag, one I couldn't afford. Over the next week, I exhausted every option I could think of. I maxed out my credit cards, applied for loans, and even considered selling my car, but it still wasn't enough. I was desperate, and desperation led me to Townsend's office. It wasn't an easy decision. Asking for help wasn't in my nature, and I knew Townsend wasn't exactly known for his generosity. But I figured that after 5 years of loyal service, he might at least be willing to give me an advance on my salary. I should have known better. "Cancer, huh?" he said, leaning back in his chair with that infuriating smirk. "That's tough. But I'm not a charity, and frankly, I don't think this is my problem." I felt the words like a punch to the gut. "I'm not asking for charity," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm asking for a loan. I'll pay it back, with interest." Townsend shook his head. "You should have negotiated a better salary if you wanted financial security. I pay you what you're worth." That was the moment something inside me snapped. The respect I'd forced myself to feel for him evaporated, leaving only anger and disgust. I left his office without another word, but as I walked back to my desk, a thought began to form, a dangerous, exhilarating thought. It started innocently enough. At first, I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. I spent my evenings combing through the company's financial records, claiming I was catching up on work. My position gave me access to more information than most, and it didn't take long before I started noticing discrepancies. Small things, at first, accounts that didn't add up, invoices with vague descriptions. But the deeper I dug, the clearer it became. Townsend was running a financial empire built on lies. There were offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell companies used to funnel money, and creative accounting tricks that bordered on outright fraud. It was all there, hidden in plain sight, and yet no one seemed to notice. I didn't know what to do with the information at first. Part of me was terrified of what would happen if I got caught. But the other part, the part that was still seething from Townsend's callousness, couldn't let it go. So I started saving everything. I copied files onto a USB drive, encrypted with a password only I knew. I told myself it was just a precaution, that I wasn't actually planning to do anything with the information. That changed the day Townsend fired me. I should have seen it coming. The firm had been cutting costs for months, and Townsend had made it clear that no one was safe. But I had convinced myself that my work ethic and seniority would protect me. I was wrong. Nothing personal, he said, sliding a termination letter across his desk. It's just business. I stared at the letter, my hands trembling with rage. You're laying me off after everything I've done for this company. He shrugged. You'll land on your feet. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to throw the letter back in his face. Instead, I nodded, biting back the bitter retort that was on the tip of my tongue. As I packed up my desk, my coworkers avoided my gaze. They were too afraid of Townsend to speak up, too scared to acknowledge the injustice happening right in front of them. But I didn't care about them. I didn't care about the job. All I cared about was the USB drive sitting in my bag, the one thing that Townsend didn't know I had. As I walked out of the office for the last time, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Townsend thought he had won, but he had no idea what was coming. He had just handed me the perfect opportunity for revenge. The first thing I did after being fired was drive to the hospital to see my mother. It wasn't a long drive, but it gave me time to think about what I was about to do. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white as I replayed Townsend's smirk in my mind, the way he so casually dismissed me as though I were nothing. I hated him. But this wasn't just about hate anymore. When I got to the hospital, my mom was sitting up in bed, her face pale but smiling when she saw me. She always smiled, no matter how much pain she was in. Hey, sweetheart, she said softly. You're here early. Don't you have work? The lump in my throat was impossible to swallow. I forced a smile. Not anymore. They let me go today. Her face fell. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. It's fine, I lied. It's not like I loved that place anyway. We spent the next hour talking about anything but work. She told me about the nurses, how kind they were, how they made her laugh even when she didn't feel like it. I listened, nodding along, but my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about Townsend. About the USB drive. About what I was going to do next. Before I left, my mom grabbed my hand and gave it a squeeze. Don't let this get you down, she said. You're stronger than you think. I kissed her on the forehead and promised her I'd be okay. But as I walked out of the hospital, I knew I wasn't going to be okay, not until Townsend got what was coming to him. The first step was research. I didn't want to make any rash moves that could blow up in my face, so I spent days reading everything I could about whistleblowing, financial fraud, and the potential consequences of what I was planning to do. The USB drive was a goldmine. I had files detailing Townsend's offshore accounts, proof of tax evasion, and even email exchanges where he explicitly instructed others to manipulate numbers to deceive clients and regulators. It was enough to ruin him, and maybe even send him to prison. But I couldn't just drop it all in one place. That would be too obvious, too risky. I needed to be strategic. I started with an anonymous tip to the IRS. Their website had a section specifically for reporting tax fraud, and I made sure to include all the necessary details, attaching the most damning files from the USB drive. I wrote the tip carefully, disguising my language to ensure it couldn't be traced back to me. Next, I reached out to a journalist I'd been following for years. Her name was Elena Morales, and she had a reputation for exposing corporate corruption. I created a burner email account and sent her a message with a sample of the evidence I had. It didn't take long for her to respond. This is big, her email read. If everything you've sent me checks out, this could be the story of the year. Can we talk in person? I hesitated. Meeting in person felt dangerous, but if I wanted Townsend to pay, I couldn't do this halfway. Elena suggested a coffee shop on the other side of town, far from anywhere Townsend or his cronies might see me. When I arrived, she was already there, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 30s with a notebook and recorder on the table in front of her. "You must be the whistleblower," she said as I sat down. "I guess you could call me that," I replied, keeping my voice low. She leaned forward, her expression intense. "I've been doing this a long time, and I can tell when someone's got a grudge versus when someone's got the goods. From what you sent me, you've got the goods. But before we move forward, I need to know, why are you doing this?" I wasn't expecting the question, but the answer came easily. "Because Townsend deserves to be exposed. He's ruined lives, including mine, and he thinks he can get away with it. Someone needs to hold him accountable." Elena nodded, satisfied. "Okay. Here's how this works, you give me everything you've got, and I'll verify it. If it checks out, I'll write the story, but I'll need your cooperation to make it airtight." "My name can't be in it," I said firmly. "I don't care what happens to him, but I don't want this blowing back on me." "Fair enough," she said. "I'll protect your identity, but know that Townsend's going to come after you anyway. Men like him don't go down without a fight." I handed her a second USB drive with all the files I had copied. "Just make sure he does go down." The next few weeks were a blur. Elena kept me updated on her progress, and every time she found something new to corroborate the files, I felt a small sense of satisfaction. Meanwhile, the IRS had launched an investigation into Townsend's taxes. I started seeing headlines about the audit, and although Townsend's name wasn't mentioned yet, I knew it was only a matter of time. But I wasn't done. I wanted to hit Townsend from every angle, to make sure he had no chance of recovering. So I started reaching out to his clients anonymously, sending them evidence of his fraudulent practices. I knew it was risky. If anyone traced the emails back to me, I could be in serious trouble, but the thought of Townsend losing everything kept me going. And then the first article dropped. The headline was bold: "Investment firm CEO accused of fraud, tax evasion, and misconduct." Elena had done her homework. The article was thorough, citing anonymous sources and laying out the evidence in a way that was impossible to ignore. By the end of the day, it was all over the news. Townsend released a statement denying the allegations, calling them baseless attacks from disgruntled individuals. But the damage was done. Clients began pulling their accounts, employees started quitting, and the firm's stock took a nosedive. I should have felt victorious, but I didn't. Not yet. Because I knew Townsend wouldn't go down quietly. And I was right. One night, as I was sitting in my apartment, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "I know it's you," the text read. "You think you're clever, but you've made a mistake. Watch your back." I stared at the message, my heart racing. It had to be Townsend. Somehow, he'd figured out what I was doing. But instead of fear, I felt something else: resolve. This wasn't over, not yet. And if Townsend wanted a fight, I was ready to give him one. The text message was the first sign that Townsend knew he was under attack. I should have been terrified, and part of me was, but mostly, I felt exhilarated. Townsend was on the ropes, his empire collapsing around him, and he knew someone had orchestrated it. What he didn't know, at least not yet, was how much more damage I was planning to inflict. After his text, I did two things. First, I ditched my phone. I wasn't taking any chances on him tracking my number or location. I replaced it with a cheap burner phone that I paid for in cash. Second, I doubled down on my anonymity. I stopped accessing the files I'd saved from my own computer, used public Wi-Fi to send my anonymous emails, and rerouted my communications with Elena through secure channels. If Townsend wanted to find me, I wasn't going to make it easy for him. The fallout from the first article had been massive, but it was only the beginning. Elena was already working on a follow-up, and this time, she wanted to dive deeper into Townsend's personal life. She called me late one evening, her voice sharp with urgency. "There's something you need to see," she said. "Meet me tomorrow. Same coffee shop." When I arrived the next morning, Elena slid a folder across the table to me. Inside were photos, grainy, but clear enough, of Townsend leaving a hotel with a woman who was definitely not his wife. This is from 2 months ago, Elena said. The woman is married to one of his biggest clients, Mark Hathaway. Ring any bells? It did. Mark Hathaway was a billionaire real estate mogul, one of the firm's crown jewels. Losing his business would be devastating for Townsend. You think Hathaway knows? I asked, flipping through the photos. Not yet, Elena said. But I've got sources who say his marriage has been on the rocks for a while. If this gets out, it'll be the final nail in Townsend's coffin. For a moment, I hesitated. Going after his business dealings was one thing. Exposing his personal life was another. But then I thought about my mom, about the employees Townsend had screwed over, about the smirk on his face when he fired me. He didn't hesitate to destroy lives for his own gain, why should I? Do it, I said. Expose him. The second article dropped a week later. The headline read, CEO's secret affair with client's wife sparks scandal. The media frenzy was immediate and brutal. Hathaway pulled his account within hours of the story breaking, and several other high-profile clients followed suit. Townsend's name became synonymous with scandal, his face plastered on every news outlet as reporters speculated about how deep his corruption went. At the same time, the IRS investigation had picked up steam. Rumors began circulating that federal charges were being prepared against him. Townsend was no longer just a disgraced CEO, he was a pariah. It should have felt like victory, but something was gnawing at me. Townsend wasn't the kind of man to sit back and let his world crumble. He was plotting something, I was sure of it. That's when I noticed the car. It started as a subtle feeling, the kind you can't quite put into words. I'd be walking to the grocery store or sitting in my car, and I'd feel like someone was watching me. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia. After all, I'd been careful. Townsend couldn't possibly know where I lived, or so I thought. But then, late one night, as I was driving home, I saw it, a black SUV with tinted windows, sitting at the end of my street. It was parked there when I turned into my driveway, and when I glanced out my window an hour later, it was still there. The next day, I saw the same SUV parked outside the coffee shop where I'd met Elena. I didn't confront it. Instead, I started making small changes to my routine. I took different routes home, avoided going out at night, and started scanning every parking lot and street corner for the SUV. It didn't follow me every day, but it appeared often enough to confirm my suspicions. Townsend had someone watching me. Elena was the first person I told. He's having you followed, she said, her tone grim. That means you're getting to him. He's desperate. Desperate enough to do something reckless? I asked. Maybe. Men like Townsend don't think like normal people. They don't care about right or wrong, they care about power. And when they lose it, they lash out. Her words chilled me, but I refused to back down. If anything, Townsend's surveillance only strengthened my resolve. He wanted me to feel scared, to feel powerless, but I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. The question was, what would he do next? I got my answer a few days later. It was late afternoon when the knock came at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my stomach twisted with unease as I peered through the peephole. Two men in suits stood on the other side, their expressions unreadable. Ms. Collins, one of them asked when I cracked the door open. Yes. We're with the FBI. We'd like to ask you a few questions. My heart dropped. The FBI. They flashed their badges, and suddenly, the walls of my apartment felt like they were closing in. Can we come in? One of them asked. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to slam the door and run. But running would make me look guilty, and I hadn't done anything illegal, at least, nothing they could prove. Sure, I said, stepping aside. The agent sat on my couch, their eyes scanning the room as if cataloging every detail. This is about Townsend, isn't it? I asked, trying to sound calm. One of them nodded. We're investigating allegations of financial misconduct at his firm. We understand you used to work there. That's right, I said carefully. Did you have any knowledge of illegal activity while you were employed? I hesitated. I couldn't lie to the FBI, but I also couldn't afford to reveal too much. I suspected things weren't on the up and up, I said. But I wasn't in a position to know for sure. The agent leaned forward, his expression sharp. Did you provide any information to the media? My heart raced, but I kept my face neutral. No, I lied. I've been trying to move on since they fired me. The agents exchanged a look, then stood. If you think of anything, one of them said, handing me a card, give us a call. And if anyone contacts you about this, let us know immediately. As soon as they left, I collapsed onto the couch, my mind racing. Townsend was playing dirty. Somehow, he'd managed to deflect the heat onto me, painting me as the source of the leaks. I had no idea how much he'd told them, or how much they believed. But one thing was clear, the battle between us was far from over. That night, I sat in the dark with the burner phone in my hand, debating my next move. Townsend was closing in, and I needed to hit back hard before he completely turned the tables. There was still one card I hadn't played. One piece of leverage that could finish him for good. The question was, could I use it without destroying myself in the process? I didn't sleep that night. Townsend had managed to put the FBI on my doorstep, and the black SUV hadn't shown up again, which was somehow even more unsettling. It meant he was changing tactics, playing a different game, one I wasn't entirely prepared for. But I still had the ace up my sleeve, the one thing Townsend could never see coming. That ace wasn't just about money or scandal. It was about something far bigger, far darker. It was about the person Townsend had been working with all along. The next morning, I called Elena. We need to meet, I said. Is this about the FBI? She asked. It's bigger than that. I've got one last piece of evidence, but I need your help to figure out how to use it. Elena agreed to meet me at her office, and I spent the rest of the day digging through the files on my USB drive, double-checking what I already knew to be true. I was sweating by the time I arrived at her office, my nerves shot. When I got there, I handed her a folder. This is the last nail in his coffin. She flipped it open, her eyes scanning the pages inside. At first, her expression was calm, but then her eyebrows shot up, and she looked at me with something close to disbelief. Is this real? She asked. It's real, I said grimly. The folder contained evidence that Townsend wasn't just stealing from his clients, he was laundering money for someone else. Someone powerful. There were wire transfers from the firm's accounts to offshore holdings connected to a name that even I had trouble believing when I found it, Senator Richard Callaway. Callaway wasn't just any politician, he was the rising star of Washington, a man who had built his entire career on a platform of cleaning up corruption and standing up for the little guy. He was a media darling, a rumored future presidential candidate. And yet, here he was, tied to Townsend in a web of secret payments, shell companies, and backdoor deals. This could blow up everything, Elena said, her voice hushed. Not just Townsend, but Callaway too. If this gets out. It has to get out, I interrupted. This is bigger than revenge. It's about justice. Elena hesitated. You realize what you're doing, don't you? Callaway has connections, powerful ones. If you expose this, you're not just going to make enemies. You're going to put a target on your back. I'm already a target, I said. Townsend's made sure of that. But if we don't do this, he'll find a way to wriggle out of everything. Callaway is his safety net. If we cut that net, Townsend falls for good. Elena nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. All right, she said. But we're going to need more than just these documents. We need someone to corroborate this. Someone who can tie Townsend and Callaway together in a way that can't be denied. I froze. There was only one person who could do that. It was late when I made the call. The burner phone felt heavy in my hand as I dialed the number, my stomach twisting with dread. Hello, a familiar voice answered after the third ring. It's me, I said. There was a long pause. Then, I was wondering when you'd call. The voice belonged to Sarah Green, Townsend's former assistant. She had worked for him for nearly a decade before she was quietly let go last year. The rumors around the office had been vague, something about a mutual separation, but I'd always suspected there was more to the story. "I need your help," I said. "You mean you need me to help you bring down Townsend?" she replied. Her voice was sharp, but there was an edge of bitterness to it, the kind that only comes from betrayal. "What makes you think I'd want to get involved?" "Because you hate him as much as I do," I said. "And because I know you have the receipts. You were his gatekeeper for years. If anyone knows where the bodies are buried, it's you." There was another long pause. Then she said, "Meet me tomorrow. I'll text you the address." Sarah lived in a modest townhouse on the outskirts of the city. When I arrived, she was waiting for me in her living room, a box of files and a laptop sitting on the coffee table in front of her. "I kept everything," she said, gesturing to the box. "Emails, bank statements, even copies of documents he made me shred. I knew he'd screw me over eventually, so I made sure I had leverage." I stared at the box, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of it. "Does it tie him to Calloway?" Sarah gave a bitter laugh. "Oh, it does more than that. Calloway wasn't just laundering money through Townsend, he was using him to fund his campaign illegally. There are records of cash payments, fake invoices, even meetings between them. It's all here." This was it. The smoking gun. "What's your price?" I asked. Sarah's expression hardened. "I don't want money. I want him destroyed. That's my price." The final article hit like a bomb. The headline read, "Senator Calloway and disgraced CEO Townsend, the corruption connection." It was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, laying out the entire scheme in excruciating detail. Elena had worked overtime to fact-check every piece of evidence, and Sarah's testimony added a layer of credibility that no one could ignore. The backlash was immediate. Calloway denied everything at first, but within days, multiple investigations were launched. Protesters swarmed his offices, demanding his resignation. By the end of the week, he had stepped down, his career in shambles. As for Townsend, the FBI raided his firm the day after the article dropped. He was arrested on charges of tax evasion, money laundering, and fraud. Watching the footage of him being led out of his office in handcuffs was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. But the victory came at a cost. A week after the article was published, I received another text from an unknown number. "You've made powerful enemies. This isn't over." I knew it wasn't Townsend, he was rotting in a jail cell. This was someone else, someone higher up the food chain. Calloway's allies, perhaps, or the other people tangled in Townsend's web of corruption. For a moment, I felt a flicker of fear. But then I thought about my mom, who was now in remission thanks to the money I'd made from a consulting gig I'd picked up after leaving the firm. I thought about the employees Townsend had screwed over, finally free of his toxic leadership. And I thought about the look on Townsend's face as the FBI dragged him away. I had no regrets. Because sometimes, revenge isn't just about justice, it's about tearing down the systems that let people like Townsend and Calloway thrive in the first place. And if they wanted to come for me, let them. I wasn't afraid anymore.